this video I'm going to show you several different watercolor techniques. These techniques are good for making texture sometimes, or mainly for texture, sometimes for value. What you will need to do this is you'll need the paper that you're going to be painting on, and it should be watercolor paper. Any other type of paper will not work very well. You'll need 2 cups of water, 1 clean and 1 dirty. You'll need at least 1 paintbrush, maybe 2. You'll need your watercolor paints and possibly a watercolor tray. You'll need a white crayon that's clean. You'll need a sponge. Any type of sponge will work. You'll need a little bit of plastic wrap, a paper towel, and then a piece of cardboard. Okay, preferably a corrugated cardboard. Okay, and I believe that's everything that you need. So on my paper I have 11 different watercolor techniques. Okay, you have probably used at least 1 or 2 of these techniques before, but some of these might be brand new to you. The very first one that I'm going to show you is called dry brush. Okay, so first off, your watercolor paints should be prepared. Okay, they should be damp. There should be a little bit of puddle in the color that you want to use. Everything should be ready, and mine is not, so ignore me for a minute. Okay, let me show you first examples of dry brush. Okay, so this right here is dry brush. It makes these kind of streaky lines. And this one right here is another example of dry brush. My paper got a little dirty. Okay, so you're going to take a brush that is dry, that has not been dipped in any kind of water. Okay, and you're going to put your brush barely in your watercolor paint. You kind of just want to get the tips wet. Okay, and then you're just going to paint with it. Okay, it should be kind of streaky, and mine's just a little bit streaky. Okay, this is dry brush. This is good for, like, I think it's good for like grass or hair. That's a good texture for that. Okay. The second technique that I'm going to work on, or actually I'm going to work on 2 techniques. Those ones take a bit of time, and so I'm just going to prepare the squares for them, and then we'll get back to them. So the first one is called glazing, and I'm just going to do a little bit of it, and we'll come back to it in a little bit. Okay, and then the next one is plastic wrap. And for this one, I'm just kind of crumbling up a little bit of plastic wrap and pressing it onto the paper. And we'll come back to that one. I'm actually going to hold it down. Okay, so the next technique that I'm really going to show you is an even wash. Now this is a technique you've probably used before. Okay, so you're just filling your brush up and you're painting across your paper. Okay, you want to get the same value across the whole thing. That's why it's called an even wash. It's even across the whole thing. Okay, the next technique, or the third one, I'm just kind of going down, is called a graduated wash. Now this one kind of makes sort of a gradient or an ombre effect. Let me show you a couple examples. So this right here is a graduated wash, and this is another graduated wash. Now this one isn't as good as the other one. Okay. So what you do at the very top of your square is you're going to draw a line of paint across it. And make sure it's pretty thick and it doesn't dry. Okay, after you draw your line of paint, you're going to dip your brush into your dirty water, or your dirty water cup. If you're using one color, it should be that the color should be tinted that color. So I'm using purple. My water is like this shade of purple. Okay, so I dip my brush in this water. And now I'm going to paint a line of this water right underneath what I just painted. Okay, I'm going to dip my brush in the water again, and I'm painting another line. And there's sort of a puddle kind of happening right here, so I'm going to paint another line without dipping my brush. Now I'm going to dip my brush again. Dip it again. And you keep dipping your brush into the water until you get to the bottom of your square. Okay? If you did it right, your paint should sort of be fading downwards. Now mine's okay. I think I let my color dry a little bit while I was dipping in the water. Okay, the graduated wash you want to do quickly, because if you let it dry, it doesn't work very well. Okay. The next technique is called wet and wet, and this one you can use two different colors, or you could use water, the clear water plus your color. So for me, I'm going to use the clear water. So in your clean cup, your clean water cup, you're dipping your brush. Okay? Do not dry off your brush. Let it be full of water. Okay? Now you're just going to paint this water into that square. If you're not sure where you painted, you just need to kind of tilt your head, kind of look at your paper from the side, and if you painted everything, you should see the reflections of light off the top of your paper. Okay. Now I'm going to dry my brush off. After you painted your water, you're going to dip your brush into your color. My color's sort of running out, so I'm adding more water. And you're going to fill your brush up with that color. And then you can just start drawing on that paint, or painting on the water, sorry. Okay, and it should spread out like this. Okay. Now this is called wet and wet. The reason why this is called wet and wet is because you're painting wet paint into another wet paint, or your wet water. Okay. The next technique is called glazing, and I sort of worked on this one a little bit earlier. This one you're just building up subtle layers of paint, so you're making it darker every time you paint on it. So I'm going to do another layer, and then maybe when we get to blotting, I'll add another one after that. So I've already got one. Now I'm going to add my second layer of paint. Every layer should come out darker. Okay, so we'll come back to this one once I get to blotting, or maybe resist. Okay, the next technique is called sponge. Basically, you're painting with a sponge. So make sure your paint is full of water, or has a puddle in it. Mine's full. And then I'm going to stick my sponge into that puddle. And now you're just going to paint with it. So let's see what happens. Okay, so that is my sponge, and you can do this with different types of sponges. You could do it with a sponge that you use to clean dishes with. You can do it with these fun little sponges like this. You could even do it with like one that you find from, like I think there's some natural sponges that you could use. Okay, so the next one is sort of like the sponge. It's called blotting. And this one, what you do is first you're going to paint some of the watercolor into that square. Then, using your paper towel, your clean paper towel, I kind of squish mine up so it's got funky creases and stuff in it. And then you're just going to use this to kind of lift up some of that paint. And hopefully it'll leave like an interesting texture. And this is a good way to make your colors lighter as well, because sometimes we overdo it and we make it too dark. But you have to do it while your watercolor is still wet. Okay, here's an example of blotting right here. So the orange around it was painted. What was this lighter light orange was what was picked up. Okay, this is another example of sponge. Here's another one that's a sponge that I think is pretty good. Okay, so what we're going to do next is resist, but I think my glazing is a little bit dry enough where I can do another layer. So I'm just going to add more paint on top of this. You can kind of see already that it's getting darker with every layer. Okay, so now we're on to resist. For resist, you'll need a white crayon. What you should do is think about something that you want to draw. I am just going to draw or write the words hi. Okay, you're going to write it with this crayon, this white crayon. But you need to press down so hard that you feel like you're going to break the crayon. So you're pressing down pretty hard. And you might go over your layer, what you wrote a couple times, or drew, what you wrote or drew. This just ensures that you really press down hard enough. Now, when I do this, sometimes I do not press down hard enough, so I'm going to go over this a couple times. Okay. So I just wrote the words hi on there. You can't see it because it's white. Okay. After you have written or drawn what you want, you're going to take your paintbrush and you're going to paint in that square. Okay. If you did it right, your watercolors should move around what you wrote. Now, when I look at mine, I can tell that I did not write hard enough. But I did write hard enough in some areas. So just make sure you're pressing down hard enough for that to work. The next technique that I'm going to do is called salts for this. Okay, and I'm going to show you what this looks like. When you're working on it, it won't look like anything, but I'll tell you what to do after it dries once I finish it. So this right here is salt. It kind of has this kind of granular texture, kind of like sand, sort of. Okay, and that is salt. So what you do first is you're going to paint your square with whatever color you choose. Oops, need more color. I think this works a little better once you have your paper pretty wet and it's going to take a while to dry. Okay. After you have your little puddle made, what you'll do is get a little bit of salt, put it in your hand. And then you're just going to pour it onto that paint, or sprinkle it like me. That salt will absorb all of the water, but it'll still take a little bit to dry. Okay? Once your paper is completely dry, and this will probably happen in at least an hour. You might wait till overnight for it to dry completely. After it dries, that's when you're going to scrape off your salt. And then it'll look like this. Have that interesting texture. Okay? The next technique is a plastic wrap, and this I did earlier. Okay? What you do first is you're going to paint the square and then press plastic wrap on it. So now I think it's pretty dry, so I'm going to peel the plastic wrap off and see what happened. Okay, so that's the plastic wrap. It's sort of like blotting, and it made this interesting texture pattern with the plastic wrap. That seemed to work better once I had it pressed down. So like I had this pressed down on there, and then I had my bottle over the top. And that just held it in place while it was drying. Okay, the last technique I'm showing you, and it seems like I showed you like a million, is with cardboard. Now this is sort of like printmaking. You're kind of just using the corrugated side to make a pattern. Okay, I think the best way to do this, we'll see if it works, is just to paint the sides of this cardboard like that. Now let's see what happens when I press it on the paper. I don't know if that worked very well. Let's try another one. So now I got that opening of the cardboard. This might be good for like something that's really holy, like maybe like a mushroom, or it kind of looks like the steel supports on buildings, or it could be like bamboo. Okay, this would be good for like patterns. Okay, so these are all different techniques that you could do with watercolor. Okay, there's probably more than this than what I showed you, but these are some basic ones that are really easy to do and don't require a ton of things. So the first one was even wash, and then we had our dry brush, then graduated wash, or your gradient, wet and wet, glazing, and you can see how as we added more watercolor it got darker over time, sponge, blotting, resist, although it didn't work completely well, sea salts, which ends up looking like this, plastic wrap, and then lastly cardboard. I hope you at least try these all at least once.